All right, so let's go ahead and talk about inheritance, which is another feature that is very important in object-oriented programming. Okay, so classes are the basics or the building blocks, okay, of what we call of the object-oriented programming realm, if you will. So now that we have classes and we understand what classes are and how to create objects, we need to talk about inheritance. Now, again, because I like putting together analogies so that we can actually understand what's going on. When we talk about inheritance in the real world, often think of something that is passed down to us. For instance, your parents exist or existed. All of us had parents, one way or the other. And then something happens, which we don't need to go into those details because I believe you know what happens, what your parents did. You then showed up. Now, what happens? You inherited a lot of different characteristics from your parents. But most of the characteristics that you've inherited physically are characteristics that are the default characteristics, as well as characteristics that are not default characteristics. For instance, some people may argue that you can also inherit some sort of different kind of mannerisms or behaviors. We don't have to go all crazy about that, but the idea is that we inherit features from our parents. So had long hair or had brown hair or had bigger noses or small noses. So all those features we do inherit from them to create us, in this case you. And then you of course find your mate and you create offsprings, in this case your children, and so forth. You notice that down the line we are continuously, as a human species, passing our features to the future humans. Passing down of features is what we call inheritance. Now there's the financial inheritance or the material inheritance that you can get. If your parents had a piece of land and they passed, or your grandparents, they pass, they pass it down to their child, which is your parents, and then they pass to you, or vice versa, and so forth. But the idea is that you're passing something down. Now, when it comes to programming, an object-oriented programming paradigm here, we have the same concept, which is the idea of creating classes in this hierarchy of classes and object is to foster an environment we don't have to create classes that repeat the same features. What that means is the following. For instance, if we have animal class, okay, the animal class would be a class that has all of the properties of what a general or what a default animal per se has, those features, right? And so what we can do then when we want to create another type of animal or a group of animals, in this case felines, we can inherit, because all the felines are animal. But felines is a group of type of animal with some extra specific features or attributes. And then inside of these felines, we can be more specific and create, for instance, cats or also tigers. So in this case, cats is of type felines, which is of type animal. So down the line, what's happening here? We are inheriting the basic default features of our parents. So felines is parents to cats and tigers in this case, which in return, felines inherit a generic animal. But also we can say that a person, you and I, we are animals as well, aren't we? So we have the animal in the animal kingdom. We are part of the animal kingdom, which means we are animals. A different kind of animals, though. We are not felines, but we are animals, which means we also inherit from our parent class, in this case, would be an animal. So this hierarchy of classes here, an object, allows us to have a very defined hierarchy, and as we define or refine all these features from each hierarchy, we are being more specific but not redundant. So this is one of the features of object-oriented programming, is that we can create a parent class and then all other classes that have similar features can inherit from the parent class. That way we don't have to redundantly create the same features as we create other classes and objects. Because remember, the creation of objects in memory is very expensive, so we need to minimize that. And one of the ways to minimize that is to take advantage of the inheritance capabilities of many object-oriented programming languages, in this case, Dart. Okay, or in this case, could also be in any other object-oriented programming language. That's what inheritance is in object-oriented programming. Now, inheritance and object superclass. So this is what I want you to understand, is that when you talk about a library in any object-oriented programming paradigm, what happens is there's always a parent class, just like the animal as the parent of all other classes at the bottom, right, which everybody inherits from. We still have the same thing as well in Dart in this case. So if you look at, for instance, an animal, like we looked before, has felines and has all of the ramifications as well, right? Person, so forth. But we also have this object class, which doesn't inherit from anybody else. It's just an object class at the top of the food chain, if you will. But animal, being our parent class for felines and person and cats and so forth, also it has to inherit or inherits implicitly from object. Also, all classes that we create in Dart or any object-oriented programming language inherits from this big main class called object. And we'll see the examples of why or how do we know that this actually happens. Any parent class that we ever write implicitly inherits from object, the object superclass as we call it. Now, everything in Dart is an object. One of the examples is, we talked about object, is the string class. The string class inherits from object class, which means, for instance, create a string, we can say string type name is equal to Paulo, and then we can actually, when the moment you use the dot operator to access something from our object, you notice the moment you say that, there's a bunch of methods and instance variables or variables that we can actually access. That is how it tells you that indeed the string is an object. This is how a language, a programming language and a framework really is set up. So essentially, Dart has a lot of different classes, and all those classes inherit from object. So any class that we create ourselves, let's say person class or some sort, it will always also inherit from object superclass. We call it superclass because that is the ultimate, almighty, powerful class that we all have to inherit from. Let's go ahead and put all into code so we can actually really wrap our head around all of this. See you next.